Well, to honor everyone's time, I think we will begin this evening. So on behalf of Mercy Education, I welcome you to our new leader orientation presentation. You are in for a great evening with Carole. My name is Susan Smith, and I am the Associate Director for Leadership Formation for Mercy Education. And I am very honored to welcome Carole to join us this evening. When I tell you she brings a breadth of knowledge, that is an understatement. Carole has spent her career in Catholic education. She started as an English teacher and then an assistant principal at Assumption High School in Louisville, which is her alma mater. After leaving Assumption, she was an English professor at Bellarmine University in Louisville, and the last 10 of her 30 years there, she was the vice president for academic affairs and the provost. She is now finishing her 9th year on the Assumption Board of Directors, the last 3 of which she has served as their chair. And she was recently appointed to Bellarmine's Board of Trustees. So Carole, thank you again for sharing your expertise with this group. And I turn it over to you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And thanks to everybody. I'm retired, but I haven't forgotten how busy everybody is. And I was just over at Assumption this afternoon for the education committee of the board that I'm on. And I'm just always inspired by the work being done by the professionals in our schools and on the boards that serve those schools to help them be the best institutions possible. Susan's going to work the slideshow for me. And you're free to ask questions anytime and just butt in. I've got notes here, so I might not be monitoring the chat thing carefully enough. So just interrupt. This should be like a good seminar class, which I'll reference later anyway. So I wanted to begin with, I love this picture, and a friend of mine, when she was working at Assumption High School, teaching religion for 43 years, actually, she went over with a group from Assumption and she said, Carole, that place is wonderful. And when you knock on the door and they open it, they say, welcome home. And I just love that image. And when I walked into Assumption today, I thought, oh my gosh, people didn't say those exact words, but they kind of did. And I think that's what we're committed to, whatever roles we hold in these schools. By the way, are all of us board chairs here? Board members, board chairs?
Board members.
Board chair.
Members.
Members and chairs. Good deal.
Chair.
Okay.
I'm president of a school.
You're one of the heads of school. Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Because I'm going to talk about both, really.
Right.
Okay, next slide, if you would. English professors are always going to have words that they quote from poets and writers that they like. But when I was finishing up this slideshow presentation, I thought it'll be right at the beginning of a new year. And I thought it was worth just kind of reminding us about the importance of beginnings. So David White, who is a 20th century poet and writer, says the ability to make a good beginning is also an art form. Beginning well involves a clearing away of the crass, the irrelevant, and the complicated to find the beautiful, often hidden lineaments of the essential and the necessary. And I like that because I think it speaks to board work and heads of schools. These are art forms, I think. I think we do have to clear away through noise and clutter, and it's not getting any less noisy out there. It's not getting any less controversial out there, and it's certainly not getting any less complex out there. So being able to kind of clear out, take a breath, and focus on the essential, I think, is one of the greatest gifts each of you, and I hope in my remaining semester at Assumption, we bring to the schools we serve. Next one. So at the beginning of this session, as I assume you all do at all your meetings as well, we pray, Creator God, we take pause as a new year and a new semester begin. We call to mind the words of Catherine Macaulay, who observed, a good beginning is of great importance. And we pray for your wisdom, guidance, and unwavering provision as we do your work. Fill us with your transformative and renewing power as we embrace the challenges inherent in complex and substantive efforts on behalf of the students we serve. Amen.
Amen.
Couple things. I said this yesterday, I said all this yesterday, but I told Susan the night before I was going to present yesterday, I thought, what have I done? Why did I say yes to this? Because when I was reviewing what I put together, and it's not that I threw it together, I did work on it. I thought this is not going to be anything new to these people. And I'm more sure than ever after yesterday that this is nothing new that you're going to hear. But I told her also that the night before I'd been listening to a podcast about the pianist Arthur Rubinstein, and somebody asked him why he thinks his work as a musician has received such acclaim. And he said, well, I don't think it's because I play the notes any better or differently than anyone else. He said, I do think I'm extraordinarily good at the rests, the pauses in what I play. And he said, and that makes all the difference. And when I heard that 2 nights ago, I thought, all right, that's what we're doing here. We're taking a rest. We're taking a pause from the 1,000,001 things that are on your lists of things to do. Your phones will be buzzing, I have no doubt, while you're sitting here. And your mind can't help but go to those things. But reminding ourselves that those pauses are critical. I assume your school is also talking about mindfulness in some way, helping our young people literally take a breath, and faculty members too, and staff. Take a breath, take a pause. New York Times did a wellness 6 days last week. I don't know if you saw it, but one of the practices they encouraged was a 5-minute pause with deep breath every morning and every afternoon. And they said the research is clear. Those rests are critical to well-being and productivity. And for those of us who are extroverts and judgers on the Myers-Briggs, who have 8 million lists around us at any given time, with something we're hoping to check off by the end of each day, being reminded of that, I think, is critical. So thank you for pausing tonight on behalf of your schools. John Gardner leads the John Gardner Institute in North Carolina, and he's big in higher education, especially in first-year studies and retention. And he had a line years ago that I read, he often repeats it, but he says to the educators, the staff members, all of us tasked with big things like retention and enrollment, student success, what is so essential that you cannot leave it to chance? What is so essential that you cannot leave it to chance? And when it comes to strong boards, actually, I think when it comes to excellent anything, you can't leave hardly anything to chance. It all has to be reclaimed, reconfigured, recommitted to do it well. Now, as Susan said, I've been on a board for 9 years. I'm starting it again. When I was provost, I went to every board meeting at Bellarmine in a different capacity. And like you, I have my impressions of effective boards, and I dare say some boards where at the end of the time, you can tell everybody couldn't wait to get out of the door. Our goal as board chairs are to host meetings and oversee boards where people aren't just seeing it as another resume line. They see it as, and I used this phrase with Susan yesterday and the attendees, because I believe it, as the sacred trust it is. It's a sacred trust on behalf of the community where our institutions are living. It's a sacred trust on behalf of the parents who've entrusted their students to us, to the students themselves. I met with students today at the beginning of the meeting and asked them about, and we always ask them, do you think Assumption has prepared you well for your next step? And be honest. You love it when they say yes. You love it when they say, I've had to work really hard here, but I feel like I'm ready for the next step. And while I had to work hard, they said today, I knew every teacher here wanted me to succeed and was here to help me meet those challenges, not just throw out the challenges and see if I can make them or not. That's not leaving it to chance. So that's what we're here about. And if you could take a minute, since I referenced your board work and mine, think to yourself of a really good board meeting you attended and jot down or think in your mind what made it good. Effective, powerful, whatever word you want. And you know where I'm going. If you've been to some like I have, where you thought, Mother of God, will this ever be over? Why did you feel that way? What was going on or not going on? Could have been either or both in that room that made you just want to bolt and wonder what you were doing there. Ask yourself at that time, is this a good use of my time? I've got 8 million commitments. Is this the board I want to be on? And board chairs, I think we do well not to forget that our board members could always be asking themselves, is this a board I want to be on? And I really credit Susan and her colleagues in the Sisters of Mercy for asking us to really focus on trying to have the best boards possible. We talk about the best schools a lot. Great institutions. I think it's great if Mercy schools are known for being leaders in boards as well. Because I think great schools do have great boards. It's kind of a hand in hand. So with that in mind, and with me admitting that you're going to hear what you already know, and also acknowledging that this is by no means an exhaustive list, let's just start and look at some best practices. This is, if you ask the people I worked with on my team at Bellarmine, this is a quotation from John Gardner, who runs the John Gardner Institute in North Carolina. I heard him speak once, and this sentence in question never left my mind. I think it is critical to strong leadership. And I think it's especially important because we are so busy, most of us, running like crazy people, trying to keep up with the work at hand and trying to get the next class ready, the next meeting prepared, the next phone call answered, the next budget reviewed, that we can miss important things, or we've done something a million times. So let's just go in and give another talk to the faculty, or let's go meet parents again at open house. But he reminds us every time we undertake work that's important, and it's all important, ask ourselves, what is so essential that we can't leave it to chance? I think great boards have board chairs and heads of schools who approach every board meeting that way, every board initiative that way, every board resolution that way. It's taken with great consideration and great, I'm going to say it, gravitas. That's a word that can be overused, but I don't think it is in this context. And I would say, as I've kind of tried to imply, it's an ongoing thing. You don't cover the essential stuff once and then check, you're done every time. So great boards ask themselves this all the time. I think great school leaders ask themselves this all the time. And they say we ask ourselves this because we're involved in a phrase that I also love, in a sacred trust. I really don't think we use lofty enough language often enough to describe what you and I and everybody on the screen and everybody we work with in our schools, what it is that we have been, let's use the lofty word again, commissioned to do, anointed to do. So we don't leave it to chance. We work hard and diligently. Next one. So let's get into it. And again, I'm going to say, I'm going to not cover anything I know for a fact that you haven't heard. So I asked myself again last night, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? They know all of this. I was a fool to say yes. I'm going to look like a big, simpleton, like, oh yeah, like we didn't know that. But then I was listening to a podcast last night about the great pianist Arthur Rubinstein. And they asked him why it is that he thinks his music, his work, his performances have received such acclaim. And he said, well, I don't think, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't think it's because I played the notes that much better than anyone else. He said, but I do think I am extraordinarily good at the rests between notes, at the pauses between movements and notes. And last night I thought, okay, Carole, this is what we're doing tomorrow. Everybody's stepping away from their busyness, from the 8 million things that are pressing you in your brain right now, from the pager and the phone in your pocket are probably buzzing on mute right now, reminding you that another email is coming in, another request is coming in. It's hard really to rest. But I think great board chairs and boards and heads of schools and deans and those in charge remind us all we need to take a rest here and take stock of how we're doing. How is it going on behalf of the students? So best practice number one, no big earth-shattering new. Know the organization you serve. But I will say, you expect an English teacher to talk about words a lot. I think no is a throwaway word sometimes, but if you really know someone, you've put forth a lot of effort. If you know something well enough to teach it, you've put forth a lot of effort. And you don't just get that knowledge again. Oh, I know Susan Smith. Check. No, because Susan keeps growing and evolving. So my knowledge of Susan keeps growing. Assumption High School keeps moving and evolving. I will tell you quite candidly, the school that I joined the board of 9 years ago is not the school that I will be leaving in May. At its core values, sure, but oh my, it's gone through a pandemic since I joined. Those teachers have been traumatized since I joined the board. We have had issues in culture about race, and politics, and fears in Louisville, violence with police and demonstrations, all of that. None of that had happened before I joined the board. So board members have to keep knowing that organization. What is it encountering? What is it meeting? How is it responding? How is it adapting? How is it hurting as a result of that? What is precarious in a way that might not have? You might have joined a school when it was strong in enrollment and now it's not. That's a different school to be led. So knowing that organization requires really a lot of energy, intentionality, and ongoing education and formation. And again, I think those are throwaway phrases sometimes. Lifelong learners, ongoing education. I think they're critical. And great schools do it. You know it when you see it. Next slide. And I'm always going to try to reference our shared heritage and let Catherine McCauley's words remind us that what we're talking about now, she was talking about then. Core things don't change, circumstances do. So I love it. She says, you'd be well advised. That's pretty strong, actually. You'd be well advised to learn something of our history and our spirit, as they are affecting your life and our students' life and their parents and our communities and our faculties. Next slide, please. And so I remind us, literature teacher that I am who loves the images, we've entered a story already in process, you all. And I know you know this, but we're resting right now to remind ourselves of this. One which will continue and unfold after we leave our positions. And as somebody who only has 2 more meetings, I'm well aware of this and praying that I left the place better than I found it. Some processes, some energy. We've stepped into the proverbial flow of the ongoing river called Mercy Education. And I love that image, a river called Mercy Education. And then David White reminds us, why do we use the river? Because we're creatures of movement. That's what we're stepping into. And you can stay there, but before we get there, so we're on practice 1, knowing the institution. That means all things mercy. So I wouldn't do a pop quiz right now, but I think probably if all of us in our positions can't, with a little bit of thinking, call out the mercy critical concerns, that's a warning to us, I think. So if those, listen to the phrase, critical concerns, if they're not right up here for easy recall, we don't know our institutions well enough. The information that they've developed on the core values of Mercy graduates of education, if we can't call those 5 to mind in 1 or 2 minutes, I know you'd have to settle yourselves, but if after 15 minutes, or if you say right now, I got nothing, I know we talked about them. I would challenge all of us to say that's an opportunity for growth in this practice, best practice. Those are the heart and soul of what we're asking our heads of schools, faculty, and staff to be doing each and every day, and for boards to be anchoring their work in. So if they're not readily apparent, that's a growth opportunity for us. So that's part of the macro part. We also have to know where we fall in the leadership chain. Now, I'm on a board at university that doesn't have the top 2 lines. We're the head of the university, then we're the board of the school, and that's it. We are the final word. I'm not in my role at Assumption. We have the Mercy Education System of Americas, which I've just referenced with some of the materials they've shared. And we have the legal responsibilities of being canonically sponsored by the Institute of the Sisters of the Americas. This is not something we have to live in as frequently as the core values, I think, and outcomes of a graduate. Still, anytime board chairs with the heads of schools are working on any initiative that involves finances, anything big, finances are always big, anything with a building, any big expenditure, certainly any building project like Assumption, we would do well to look at each other, board chairs and the heads of schools, and say, where do the sisters fall in terms of, and we'll talk about this again later, bylaws, expectations, where does their authority and approval kick in? Do that. I'm not a big fan of people who act and then ask for forgiveness later. I'm the rule follower. Let's do it ahead of time. And I think we do that also because it's simply a matter of respecting the relationship that we're all in together. We're not trying to out-muscle anybody here. We're trying to do good work as efficiently, quickly, accurately, and positively as possible. And a misstep along the way, and missteps will happen innocently, but let's try to minimize those missteps. So know where we fall in this chain of command. And it is a chain of command, and it is a legal chain of command. I think if we do it well, it's a little bit more fluid like this, but make no doubt about it, there are boundaries there. Knowing our institution. Next one, please, Susan. Before we get to, and keep the slide, but before we get to that, I was thinking again last night, I think it goes without saying, and the heads of schools are going to be more easily involved in this. But we board chairs, we need to know about the school itself. People are going to ask us questions. I found this out as soon as I joined the board. Out of the blue, they're going to say, what's tuition assumption? What's the enrollment at assumption? What's the student teacher ratio at assumption? How many students do you have? All these things come out of the blue, and we're not used to answering those. But once we get on the board, we need to be prepared. If we don't look like we know that, we have done our schools a disservice. It doesn't look good for a board member not to be able to answer something basic. Those are basic questions about a school. You don't need to know every program, how many teachers, but you need to know, is it a big school? Is there small classes? Those kinds of things. So you need to find out about those things. You need to know about a school's morale. What is the school you're joining? How is its morale is probably a pretty good word. When I joined Assumption, it was coming after a change of leadership with a new president, and it had had its share of a little bit of trauma that it was still working through. I think that's not unusual in schools. When I joined Bellarmine University's board after the pandemic, and with it doing what so many schools and universities are doing, having to cut some programs, that's a traumatic thing for university. That affects the feeling of the school. Boards need to know that. They need to be in touch with that. And they need to be talking, we board chairs and board members, with the heads of the school to say, how are we addressing that? What is so essential that we can't leave it to chance? So knowing that the culture, and Susan and I talked about this, and I'm going to talk about it again later in the session, we need to know the school's finances. We need to know what is the financial footing of this institution. I've never joined a board without asking that. I may join a board that's having troubles, but I'm not going in blind. That's going to call on me to do something different as a board member, certainly as a board chair, than I would otherwise be anticipating doing. And I dare say, and we'll end the whole presentation on the same note, finances are make or break for our tuition-driven institutions. That is the big non-negotiable, can't be left to chance area. So I want you to be thinking right now, what are the opportunities for growth to make sure new members are well aware of what they're coming into? And I don't mean you have to scare anybody. You just have to be upfront. Tell them what you're dealing with. And how can we keep reminding people of that responsibility as we're doing other things on the boards? Because we do other things on boards. We vote on other issues too. But keep that front and center along with those critical concerns. Raise your hand. That's a pickleball court if you didn't recognize. Raise your hand if you've played. Raise both hands if you've heard anything while you were playing it. I've taken up pickleball recently, and I'm telling you, everybody said, oh, it's so much fun. It's much easier than tennis. Not so much. But I like this because pickleball has different boundaries than a tennis court. I'm used to tennis. I'm not a great tennis player, and I haven't played, but it didn't matter. My muscle memory remembered different boundaries than pickleball. And a number of my errors in this new sport is because I'm stepping in places that are not allowed in pickleball. I'm not respecting the boundaries this sport has set up. Now, in pickleball, it's no big deal. We lose a point. My partner might razz me a little bit, but the stakes aren't that high. When we don't keep good boundaries on a board and in a school, the stakes can be much higher. So that's why, and I've made missteps here, I'll just say. So this is kind of front and center for me in life as well as board. So next slide, if you would, Susan. So what are our board boundaries? And I'll let you look at those a little bit. We are Mercy schools. That keeps us within a certain boundary. Recently, and I don't think Mary would mind me sharing this, at Assumption, we had an issue that had to deal, a salary issue, a problem she had inherited that hadn't been caught in implementation, and it resulted in an issue with salaries that needed to be corrected, and it involved a little bit of money. So when we were talking about this, one of the things we said as a board is, we can respond, we can say this was an error, it was made, not our problem, not illegal. But then we said, what does being a Mercy school, and what does the phrase, we live by integrity, how do you say that every day? And how do you print it on the front step of a school, which is at Assumption, and not find every way you can to respond to this, saying to the teachers and faculty, we hear you, we understand this, and we're going to try to do right by you. That's why I mean all things mercy. I think at a public school or in a public institution, it might have been a different response, quite frankly, but not at Assumption High School or at one of your schools. We have to keep our Catholic identity, and I'm talking to people who probably much more frequently are in conversation with your local bishop and archbishop than I am as a lay person. Mary typically is going to be talking with Mary Lang, our president, talks with the archbishop. She gets the communications from the archdiocese. She knows what's being said about how you will do liturgies, how you will do other things. I was in an interesting session last year, one of these. Our Catholic Church is in flux, and there are ways to kind of push to see if we can move the needle on some things, but the bishop moves the needle. And as Catholic schools who depend on Catholic feeder grade schools, and because we want to be in good relationship with our bishop, we have to keep those kinds of boundaries. I've already mentioned the bylaws. Committee structures and missions. Mary and I agreed that when we came on board, the missions, structure, enrollment, almost everything related to our committee structures needed shoring up. It was kind of loosey-goosey. And it was kind of, is this your charge? Is this our charge? I don't know, is it both our charge? And sometimes committees will work together on a thing, but they should know this is unusual. This issue requires us to come together, but usually this is finance, or usually this is facilities, or usually this is enrollment. So I think making sure the people who have volunteered on your board have the structure they need on their committees, because so much work is done in the committees, you all, you know that. You want your volunteers to have a clear structure for doing their best work. You don't want them frustrated with you. You don't want them asking you, is this our job, or what is our charge? They won't stay with you long, I don't think, if you don't help them be successful and help them do good work. State and local statutes, we'll talk about getting good members on your board. You better have some good attorneys at hand, people who understand law, statutes about all sorts of things. And if they don't, they know who to call on your behalf. Because some of the big financial decisions, certainly some of the zoning, certainly some of the building, that has to be, and that's a slow process. So you have to make sure you're in the boundaries there. I've already talked about the school's culture. Confidentiality, you can't repeat that too often for a board. What is said in a board stays at the board. And we say it again, I hardly begin a meeting without reminding people. As a reminder, everything that happens tonight is confidential. And I always say, I'm sure you know that, but it bears repeating. And reminding them that they are ambassadors for the school. I hope I conduct my life well, whether I'm on a board or not, but certainly being a board member on 2 Catholic institutions in this community, I take that as an extra responsibility for being a good ambassador. in the way I live my life. And knowing, as I said earlier, that as an ambassador, you got to know your school and be ready to answer some questions. Now, remember what I said earlier. As soon as people know you're on the board, and let me tell you something, as soon as they know, if you haven't heard this yet, you're new. As soon as they know you're the board chair, you're going to get 4 phone calls. Carole, a friend of mine has a daughter who's a sophomore at Assumption, and she said, blah, 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 blah. You have to know how to handle that well. And what I always begin with, have you talked to Mary Lang, who's the head of the school? And if they haven't, that's the first thing you want them to do. And I always say, you know what, really, I'm going to actually insist that you do that. And then if you're not satisfied, I'll be glad to talk with you again. And probably I'll ask to meet with you with Mary, because I'm not in the school. And Mary and I are never going to be at cross purposes, ever. My job is not to run the school. My job is to organize and run the board. So knowing that, 2 summers ago, a faculty member asked to see me. She said she had gone to the administration. She wanted to, and she just wanted to make sure I knew. So I called Mary and I said, I'm going to meet with this person unless you ask me not to. But what I will tell this person is, what you're sharing with me, if you're not going to give me permission to go back to Mary and brainstorm on how to address it, we don't need to meet. Because you'll just be frustrated. I'm left with a situation I can't do anything about. Nobody wins there. So this notion of us being people that, oh, Carole fix it. And sometimes people think Carole will fix it or she knows that. No, Carole will work with Mary and Mary with her team will fix it. That's their job. So that we've had to encounter a couple of times. I've also asked board members, if they have an issue, please come to me first. And then I might say, thank you for letting me know, and I'm fine with you going to Mary, but let's don't do in runs around board chairs either. I think that can create some unhealthy dynamics. So that can sound easy, this board boundaries. I think it's easier like a class if you set them up right at the beginning of the class, right at the beginning of the board, right at the beginning of your relationship with your head of the school. But I think they're important. Let me take a pause here and ask any kind of questions or feedback or observations on anything you've heard.
Please
We're
feel
good?
free to
Yeah.
raise your hand, just ask your question. Again, Carole, I've learned so much, so many important things that you are reminding us that are just vital for good board practices. So I thank you.
And it is just a reminder. But the more we remind ourselves, the more something goes wrong, like that call from the parent to you, the board chair, you're not like completely crazed. You've thought about it. You've talked with Mary about, you've talked with your head of school. Mary, this is how I intend to handle this. So anything before I go into the next slide, which kind of falls from where we were.
Carole, I just wanted to also in your list, when you talked about committees, and sometimes we don't really talk about committees when we talk about board. So I do want to thank you, because I just think that is really critical what you said about, clearly define really roles and goals of the committee, because that really is where so much work is done, as you suggested.
Absolutely.
And I think I think boards don't always look at that like how is that committee outlined, how is it run, I think if they just spent a little bit of time looking at the committee structure and maybe doing some reconfiguring, you would use even your time more wisely as board members, and you'd be able to get work done really efficiently. So thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's something that people know there's committees of boards, but we don't talk a lot about.
And I think picking good chairs for those committees. A good board is full of smart people, but everybody's gifts are different. Everybody's time availability is different. So finding the people who will be organized, work with their board, their committee people, keep in contact with the board chair and the head of the school, who are good. You've got to be good with details if you're a committee chair, because you're the one bringing it back to the board. I think that's important too. So I agree with you now. And when it works well, it's a beautiful thing. It really is. Well, that leads us then to.
Carol?
Oh, sorry.
Hey, Carol. No, just real quick. I'm just curious, what, how does your comment about boundaries apply to board chairs maybe attending the committee meetings? Is that something that you would suggest? Is that stepping over the boundary? Is that, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
And I welcome anybody else's thoughts on that. I think if you have a good relationship with your board chairs, they might not necessarily see it as overstepping. That having been said, I'm a retired board chair. Most board chairs, or many of them are not, they don't have time to go. I barely have time to go all the committee meetings.
That's a point. Yeah.
I mean, I really don't, to do justice to them. So if I was trying to go to those, I think I would only go if Mary asked me to in some capacity, or the board or the committee chair asked me to. I think part of this is trust. You want them to know they are the chairs. That having been said, it's like anything else that you're overseeing. If something's going south, the board chair's in charge. You've got to address it. I probably wouldn't go to the meeting to address it. I would probably talk with the committee chair himself or herself. That would be my preference. But if it's a learning curve for you, I think it would be flattering perhaps to somebody on finance to say, you know, and I did this individually with the finance chair. I said, look, I'm an English professor. Words are my thing, if you haven't picked that up by now. Numbers, not so much. So learning how to read the sheets, knowing what different, could you walk me through that so I'm not completely ignorant about that, especially as a board chair? So I've done some of that one-on-one formation for myself in learning. You could do that by going to the meeting, but I didn't want to keep asking questions. What does that mean? What does that mean? That, because they got work to do. They all know what it means. I don't know if that answers your question, Jeff.
It does. You've had the same thoughts I've had. And I am an English major, and I do attend the finance committee meetings, and I sit there very quietly and take lots of notes because I need to know that. But no, the boundaries, you have reaffirmed what I had thought in my own mind. I just needed to hear somebody else say that I was on the right track. So thank you.
If anybody's done it differently and it's worked great, pipe up. I don't think there's any always best way to do it. But that's knowing your culture again and knowing your board and your committees. So, okay, next one. The next slide, which goes into kind of knowing your school and the boundaries and how you do these things. So Susan, if you can get our next slide up, here we go. There we go. I really do think the relationship between a board chair and a board president is a unique, it can be, I hate to use the word intimate. That suggests something I don't mean, but I do think it has to be something beyond just, I know your name and I see you at 4 meetings. So I picked this image of the dance because I love watching dance. Anybody can go out by themselves and bust a few moves on a dance floor, and I'll respect that. But when you're doing something intricate on the floor with another person, and one of you is going backwards, and then you change and you're doing another dance to a different tempo, I thought that's a school activity right there. You never know what each day is going to be. The tempo, everything was fine yesterday. Now Mary's on the phone going, I need to let you know something could break in the Courier Journal. if a parent takes this complaint, blah, 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 blah. I mean, the music can stop immediately. Knowing how to keep dancing with that partner, no matter what's being called of you, is an image I hope is helpful to you. When Mary Lang asked me to join the board, we went out to lunch and I said to her, Mary, I am never going to act like I'm the smartest person in the room. I know I'm not. And if there's anything being in education all my life has taught me, it's that there's always people smarter in the room, which I love because I keep learning. So that having been said, I'm an extrovert. I like to talk about important issues, and I'm really not one to hold back if I have an opinion that I think could be helpful to a conversation. So if you want me as your board chair, I'm not going to be the type who's going to call you every day and need every detail. I'm not a micromanager. But when I have something to tell you, I'm going to pick up the phone and say, Mary, have you heard about such and such? Or I heard such and such. Is this on your radar screen? Could we talk? And to Mary's credit, what she said to me was, that's exactly the type of board chair I need. Someone who will be a partner with me in this. Now, remember, a partner, you're not trying to show somebody else up on the dance floor. You don't want them to go, boy, they're both good dancers, but boy, Carole's weak, or Mary's. They're always going to be stronger at certain things, but together you should be a pretty good team. And you have to be very honest with one another. So I would ask you to take a pause right now, board chairs, and I'm going to ask you to share this out loud, but board chairs, do you feel like you can be honest with your heads of schools about something that's serious or a concern you have? Heads of school, if you have concerns about how the board chair is running the board or interacting with you or overstepping some boundaries, talking to student, faculty outside, or do you have the relationship and the courage and the honesty to say, could I talk to you about something? I don't know how we do it if we can't have that level of, I'm going to say ego, a strong enough ego to talk with each other because the stakes are so high. So I'll give you one more example. When I first joined the board, so not chair, board, 9 years ago at Assumption, and I had friends who taught there all their lives, and because I had taught there and lived in the city, I remained in touch, and I was a graduate. I remained in touch with Assumption, kept my ear to the ground, and I taught at a local university, freshman, and so I was always getting Assumption students. So I knew about Assumption. But when I joined the board, I said to Mary, could I talk to you about something I've heard in the community more than once now, which is why I want to ask you if you've heard it. Here's what I've heard. If you want to go to a Catholic girls' school in Louisville where you're going to be welcomed and accepted and treated as an individual and cared for, Assumption is your place. Love it. Love it. Here's the second part of what I heard. But if you want a great education, go to, and I won't say the school that they mentioned, the other. And I have to tell you, I didn't like hearing that. And I said to her, I said, my lived experience with the students I taught from Assumption, and from what I hear about from the teachers I know, it's either a true statement or it's a missed opportunity with messaging. What do you think it is? She said, Carole, because she was relatively new to the city herself, I've heard the same thing. Now imagine my thrill as a new board member with a head of the school who didn't feel a need to go, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. I can't believe you're mentioning such a thing. Had she said that to me, I'm not sure I would have joined the board, because I would have thought, I don't know here. Because quite frankly, I knew I'd heard it more than once. And she said, I've heard that too. And now I've been in the school long enough to know, yeah, there are other schools that offer great educations in the city, and we're one of them. And I said, so how might we address that? And from that point on, Mary Lang made it her mission with her heads in the school and with other board members and with people on our board to get a new messaging out through open house, through the way they did ads, through the materials they sent out. Partly it was, what do you lead with? What do you make sure they have to take away? Because as soon as they walk in the school, you know you're in a great caring community. You don't know you're in a great school just by walking a hall. You have to get some data for that. So from that point on, she took the ball and ran with that. And later on, she thanked me for being that candid with her. What I just said about you, that made me want to work with her as a board chair, as a head of a school. She said, that made me even more interested in having you on the board, because I knew you would bring concerns in a respectful way, one-on-one to me. That's our job, you all. I keep going back. That's our sacred trust. What's so essential, you can't leave it to chance. That's a message about the school that you can't leave to chance and hope it works out. You got to fix it. You got to get on it. And she did. So I have great respect. And I have been on some boards where, and if you've been on a board like this, where the board chair and the head of the institution weren't kind of working together, you can see it if you're a board member. If that's not working, and it is so uncomfortable. Oh my gosh, it is so uncomfortable. And it puts a damper on any kind of excitement, because there's kind of this going on between them. And you're just trying to just get through the board meeting, get the work done and get out of here. And I can't think of anything more depressing than to feel like, let's just get the board work done and get out of here. Board chairs, heads of schools, you're going to set the tone in each meeting. You're going to set the tone. They're going to look at you sitting next to each other. They're going to watch your body language. They're going to look how you interact. They're going to look at the give and take between you. It doesn't happen immediately. I get it. But every meeting they should see and feel better about who you all are, not just separately, but together. So wanted to make sure to talk about that. Next slide, please. Choose board members wisely. This is a gimme, but as gimme and obvious it is, I don't think we always do it as carefully as we should. And I don't think it's laziness. I think it's you know how it is when you have a school and you enroll people and you want athletes, you want people who sing, you want this, you want that, because you know your school is stronger with all those different, you know your school is stronger that way. You've got to look at your boards this way too. We want as much diversity in voices, backgrounds, gender, age, alums, non-alums, their diverse areas of expertise. We want to look at who we have right before we add one more person to the board. How does that person fit in with the other metrics, the gender, the age, the alums, the diversity background? And if you're like Assumption, and a lot of us are struggling with enough diversity in terms of ethnicity and race, and those voices can't be faked. That they have to come from those genuine sources themselves. So looking at every time, so for instance, we've added somebody with expertise in real estate because we're always looking at properties around, we're landlocked. So is this an opportunity where we could do something if we could afford it? Is this a property to look at? What do I know about property? Mary is smart as a whip, but what is she? She's not a real estate agent. And she doesn't have time to be out doing all that. So do that. And then here's the other thing. If your initial feeler, and there should be initial feeler, I think, before you ask somebody to be on the board. Your first meeting shouldn't be the ask. Your first meeting is to talk about Assumption, or your schools, what they've heard about the school, their excitement about school. Would you ever be interested if a spot should open up Would you ever be interested in joining the board? If they're flat, if they say, well, maybe, but I'm already on 9 boards, warning, warning, or, well, I guess maybe, warning. I want somebody who said, I love that school. My last person we just got on, his neighbor's daughter was their babysitter. And he said, I heard about Assumption from the time my kids were 2 on. I would be so honored to be on the board of this school I've heard so much about all over the city. So yes, if a place ever comes up, I would love to be on. Guess what? We didn't wait very long. We had another meeting with him at lunch and said, we'd like to extend to you an offer to be on Assumption's board. We want people who want to be on our board. And I'm not trying to be snobby here, but who feel like it's an honor to be on our board. I think it's an honor to be on Assumption's board. I think it's an honor to be a faculty member there, a teacher, the head of the school. And I want board members who feel the same way. And I rarely miss an opportunity at the beginning of our board meetings to talk about what an extraordinary trust that has been handed to us and that we've accepted collectively, and then also to thank them for doing that. Because, and I often use the word, it is sacred work. It's hard work and it's sacred work. And then once you've got them on the board, and this is to Nell's point about committees, but there are expectations for board members to be on their committee work. But you tell them that you'll be on 1 or 2 committees. How many meetings they should ask you, how many meetings, how much time will this entail before I say yes? If they haven't, they probably don't know board work enough, so you need to help them with that. What kind of financial expectation do you have? What kind of presence expectation at the school do you have? It doesn't need to be so onerous that nobody wants to be on your board, but it shouldn't be so easy that it's like, be on the board, yeah, but it's no big deal. If anybody says that about Assumption's board, I would be so disappointed. I have to tell you. Yeah, I'm on there, but it's no real work or commitment. See if you can get on. It's easy. Putting something new on your resume. Oh man, worst thing they want to say. So choose the board members wisely and keep choosing them, you all. Thank them regularly. Have them out. Our first year of a board member, I keep in touch with them regularly their first year. And at the end of their first year, I asked them what was their year like as a new board member on us. Mary and I take them to lunch. What was it like? What surprised you about Assumption? And that could be a good surprise or something that they were a little concerned about. I tell them, you only have your fresh eyes for so long. You'll always be smart. You'll always bring your expertise, but you don't bring the new way of asking. And here's the question you want them to ask every time they get a chance. Why do you do it that way? Why do you do it that way? Every time they ask you that, it's a chance for you to think about, why do we do it this way? And ask them, well, partly we've done it this way in the past, and it is kind of a habit. Are you thinking there might be a better way that might be more efficient? And sometimes I'll tell them what our rationale, and sometimes they have a better idea. It's like, I love your idea. Let's try it that way the next time. So choose them and keep choosing them. So they know it wasn't just a one and done kind of thing. Next slide, please. And this is the one I could talk about forever, so I'll try not to. I personally have never loved being on a board where I dreaded the board meetings. If they are so boring that you want to poke your eyes out 10 minutes in, something is terribly wrong. And I can't imagine anybody giving their best work to something where they're 10 minutes in like this. Oh my goodness, will this ever be over? Or, oh my goodness, we could have done this in an email. Oh my goodness, they're going to read to us everything they sent us beforehand. I didn't say view them as an introductory class. view them as master seminars where you have a group of advanced students, smart students, well into their field, coming together in a group to interact together. This is not a lecture course in a lecture hall. This is an interactive session. At least it should be a good board meeting. I've been to plenty where they weren't. My goal always is to make sure no one leaves a board meeting I chaired where they go, I thought if that lasted one more minute, I would scream. I want them to want to go a little bit overtime because we're so into the discussion at hand. I try not to go overboard, but I want them to want to keep going. So next slide. Just like a good seminar, who's enrolled? You need to know them by name. If you don't know everybody's name, learn them. If you need the placards in front, we have names in front of all of us so everybody can call us by our names, but the board chair wants to not to always have to rely on that. You want to know them individually. You want to welcome when they come in. I work the crowd 15 minutes or so before we ever start the meeting. I've taken notes from the last meeting if they had surgery, if one of their children got married, if they've gotten a new house. They're giving to assumption. They're important to assumption. I want them to know they're important to us. And so how do you know this? No, remember we started with know your institution, know your people, know your board members. Understand, and I don't know if I have board members versus board chairs, know what draws individuals to the board. These typically are high-powered, get it done, action steps, check, moving on kind of people. They want to be helpful. They want to do stuff. They don't want to listen. They want to do stuff. Give them things to do in their committees and give them things to talk about, vote on, debate, learn about. They're smart people. Give them things to do in these meetings that they can't do online in an email. So when I became chair, I said to Mary, I don't want boring meetings. Mary, I just can't stand it. Please, we've got to work. Let's do something every time that helps them learn, that lets them talk about important things going on in education. So we've had sessions on mental health of teenagers from some psychologists who came in. We've had sessions on school safety, nothing more timely than that. Then after hearing big scale, Mary, could you update us on the most recent things you've done to strengthen school safety at Assumption? We've had input on new theories of learning and teaching from experts in the field that we flew in and paid for to talk to the board and to the faculty about. If you're going to be a good member on an educational board, you've got to know education a little bit, and most of them are not professional educators. So help them learn more. Help them know this institution. And then, like any other good class, who are the extroverts and who are the introverts? When I became the chair of the committee of the board, I was used to 3 people talking most of the time at our meetings. And what I realized was there was no reason for everybody else to be there if they were just going to sit there and listen. And by the way, the extroverts had a lot of good stuff to say. It's not that it was ignorant things. One of the first things I said at the beginning when I said, now here's the deal. You know me as an extrovert. I tried not to overtalk, but I talked at the meetings before. I said, we're flipping the script with me. My job now is to listen and to lead and to organize discussion. So you're going to hear less of me than you've heard from me in these last 6 years. And I'm going to work as hard as I can to hear from as many of you at every meeting as I can. And if that means I put on kind of my school teacher thing and just call on you, I'm doing it. And I did it. And guess what? Every time I called on somebody, they had something great to offer. I paid attention to body language, and I would say, Jeff or Sylvia, you look like you have something to say there. Is this resonating with you? Susan, you look like you had a question. What's going on there? And I swear to you, every time I did that, someone spoke and they added something important. That's, I think, a board meeting a board member wants to come back to. So I really encourage you to keep working on that. Next one. And again, this is kind of saying the same thing, although I do love what I was just saying about hearing from everybody, that if you can see in parentheses by Stephen Covey, he says 1 + 1 = 3. The more voices you have, the richer the discussion, the more complete and wise the decision-making. So get those voices in. We never miss an opportunity to bring in faculty, staff, and our students at each meeting to talk to us about their lived experience or to talk about one of their initiatives. We just heard from 3 students from the ACE program at our last meeting at Assumption. They blew our minds. We had 5 minutes allotted. It went for almost 20 minutes, and it ended with board members talking about some donor opportunities that they thought they could pursue. That's golden. So I didn't cut it off. I knew we could cut off something else in the meeting. I did not cut those students off, and I did not cut that excitement off. So keep bringing them in. That's why we're there, for those students and faculty. Send meeting materials out well in advance. I hate getting something 2 days before, especially if it's the weekend. I think it suggests to people that we don't think you're busy. You got a free weekend. Nobody has a free weekend. Get them out earlier in advance, and then have a portal for everything so they can keep reviewing. We're working on a portal right now at Assumption to have all our documents in a secure place that board members don't have to scroll through their emails or don't have to have their own list of files in their own computer to scroll through. It's going to be a place for all of our board materials. And as we learn more about how that, we're going to hear about it next week at our next board member. Susan, we can share some of that if anybody's interested in that and how that's going to work. It's going to cost a little bit of money, but not excessively so. We think it's worth it. Next one. Be the chair. Heads of school, you're important people in your building. You're critical. You are the person, but in a board meeting, you are not. The chair has to be seen as the chair. And if he or she is not, it erodes the integrity of the board. Be the chair. Work with your head of school, but be the chair. And I think this is given. Plan a seminar. Always contextualize what you're doing. Most of the things are ongoing from other discussions as part of a strategic plan. Don't presume that people who have a full-time job, who are coming 4 times a year, have all of that context in their minds all the time, have all those mercy critical concerns in their mind. You have to contextualize that. As a reminder, this fits in with our strategic goal as a reminder from last meeting, we brought it to this stage and said we would bring it back for more discussion. With that in mind, I'm opening the floor, and I'll remind us of several questions that we left hanging as a starting point. Boom, then let them run off. I think great seminars have great people who ask great questions, big questions, important questions. And I think like in a good class, you don't rush your conclusions. Now remember, board members want to rush to an answer. Not because they're sloppy. I'm not implying that at all. They're used to moving, getting things done, moving on. You have to say, wait a minute, let's take a little bit more time. Be careful with the rests. Be comfortable with those rests and pauses. Next slide. Deep thinking, that's a go. Out of the box thinking. I always say, you all bring as many different parts of this. Our job, our sacred trust, is to think as thoroughly and perfectly about this complex issue for which there is not a perfect answer. We're trying to find the best resolution or decision. So bring it all, the off the wall. Bring on the other hand, kind of thinking. Bring on, what are the unintended consequences if we go this way? Say them out loud, ask people. And then always ask the sins of omission. What have we missed? What have we missed? That reference about the salary thing I talked to you about, The last thing we did after we'd settled everything, we've wrapped it up, it's ready to move forward. I said, have we missed anything? The guy next to me said, I think we need to look at tax law and how this could affect the faculty members. We all just stopped like, oh my God, why did nobody think of that before? I mean, it was the last thing we thought of, and we weren't sloppy. We're just not tax lawyers. So ask those questions, or you won't get as much good thought, I don't think. Next one. Follow up. Keep following up, communicate, send materials out. I always follow up with board members after the meeting, not all of them. I might say, so-and-so, thank you. I really loved your conversation on such and such. Thank you for bringing up the thing about tax law. That was a God saver in our discussion. Thank you for such and such. Brandon, I loved your idea, such and such. I'm going to talk to Mary about getting that on a future agenda. I want them to know they were heard. So follow up. I want them to know they were seen. So follow, and I know you're busy. I know you're busy, but a little bit of this goes a long way in keeping your board engaged. Next one. And we're almost done, then I'll turn it over. Best practice number 5, lean into the strategic and away from the tactical. I like this one. It reminds us that we're not there to be micromanagers. We're not in the weeds. We're not the tactical. We make big decisions on the board, and then the heads of schools, you go back with your teams and faculty and say, this is how it will implement in terms of this thing from the education or from the mission committee or from the extracurriculars. So we're not in the weeds, but don't forget our big responsibility that we must do. We must think big. We have to, I love the lean into. That's not passive. We're leaning into the strategic. If we're not the big thinkers, the ones taking that 60,000 foot view, who is? Who is? On behalf of the Sisters of Mercy, on the parents, of the students, of the communities. That's the sacred trust. Lean into it. That's our job. And that's not overstepping bounds. That's asking important questions and suggesting big things that should be on our radar screen. Next one. I used to say this all the time when I was a provost, and I'd meet every week with my team. I dare say there was not a group of harder working people in the universe. They were killing themselves. But 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, we wondered, we're working like crazy. We had these 3 goals when the semester started. We're a third of the way into the semester. Have we moved the needle on any of them? We're working. We're trying. We're out there. But if the ball's not being moved down the field, if your financial situation isn't improving at the school, if enrollment isn't increasing, if messaging isn't getting more effective, what's the point of those efforts? What are the new efforts that have to be made? So this isn't calling anybody lazy. This isn't calling anybody sloppy. This isn't calling anybody ignorant. This is, go back to the pianist Arthur Rubinstein, the rest between the notes. Are we moving the ball down the field? So have those robust key performance indicators. I think sometimes educators resist those a little bit. I think they're critical. And I think they need to be monitored over time. Any one at any one point of time isn't that effective. When they started first showing education committee, academic committee things on test scores, the first thing I said, well, I guess that's pretty good, but what's the context for it? Is it better than last year's? What about other schools? Do we have any national data? And I'm not trying to be argumentative, but if a data point doesn't help you improve, the data point's not very helpful. So those key performance indicators historically kept and tracked that you can have an anomalous, then you know when you had an anomalous year, and you probably know why. Pandemic, anomalous year, come back to it. But keep reviewing those key performance indicators. I did find a nice quote this morning on key performance indicators, if you'll bear with me. So I've just talked about the importance of facts, data, points. This person wrote, if we're only interested in facts, we limit ourselves to looking at what has already happened, which is a bit like trying to drive a car by only looking in the rearview mirror. So I'm a big one on data, but it has its place. Data is not visionary thinking. Data is not foresight. Data informs foresight. You can't have good vision and planning without good data, but data in and of itself, not sufficient. And then, of course, succession planning. I always talk to Mary Lang like this. Mary, are you sure we have you covered? And she and I know each other well enough for me to say this. If you get hit by a bus tomorrow, because it will be traumatic on so many levels for all of us. But meanwhile, we have a school to run. So what happens immediately in your school if you're in an accident? How does that get to somebody in the school? How does that get to me? So I know. Review it again. And we're going to put that in the portal of that new document thing too. So we always have that handy to refer. And then big time succession planning. You read the news like I do. A lot of educators are retiring. We're having a scarcity of good leadership at every level. If you're looking at somebody who could be retiring from your school soon, or even if you don't think soon, it's not too soon to think about what are your protocols for keeping an eye out for the next leader who could be coming to your school. And a good leader of your school is doing that for you too, because they know what it's like out there. Next slide. I already focused on this a little bit. I think Susan and others have heard me say this in talking about assumption. One of the things I like about assumption is they never let very good get in the way of excellent. I'm glad you're great at this. Is there a way to be greater? A great class at 10 o'clock might not be a great class at 11 o'clock. Circumstances change. So what's the next best iteration of your board? We're busy right now coming up with a new evaluation tool in addition to the one that's provided to us from the sisters, because we don't think it's micro enough to help us assess our own micro engagement at boards, to hold ourselves accountable and the board chair accountable to make it even better the next time around. What's the next best iteration of the board? Small tweak just for our next meeting. We usually have done the principal and head of school reports after committee reports. My vice chair of the board said, could we do their reports first? The committee chair reports come to us in email. We've already looked at them. Their reports are so meaty and beefy. I want to make sure we have enough time for those. We flipped them. Earth-shattering? No. Better meeting? I think so. Being responsive to a board member? Absolutely so. So I think always tweaking in any way we can to get better. Next one. And I'll then just let you all talk. I went to a meeting for board members at the university I'm on, and the head of American Governing Boards, which sends out all types of material to universities and colleges. She said, what is your one job as a board member? You have one job. So we all sat there. Nobody wanted to look stupid. Nobody wanted to say anything. We felt like freshmen in an English class. Everybody's looking down like, God, what is our one job? Because there's so many jobs. And she said, your one job is perpetuity. And she didn't say anything. Then she repeated it. Perpetuity. She said, and if that doesn't get your attention, you're not who we need on the board. Said your job collectively and individually is do everything you can in this role to ensure that your institution will remain accessible and affordable for years to come for any student to experience that education that you say you're so committed to and that is so important in your community and beyond. Perpetuity. I haven't been able to get it out of my mind, quite frankly, that word, since I heard it. And if that doesn't scream sacred trust to you, I don't know what does. So, Susan, I think we have a closing prayer, but do we have a few minutes for anybody to say anything else? And I'm sorry we didn't get into the breakout. And if we have time, anything we want to do, but again, I welcome any comments on anything. It's a lot. Not new, but it's a lot.
Carole, one thing I wanted to just, and if you can, I guess briefly talk about, in the beginning, you talked about the importance of really getting to know the school. So when you orient new board members, do you have a committee that does it? Do you do it? I know you and Mary, I think it's great that you sit down with board members, new ones at the end of the year and take them out and ask. At the beginning, is it a committee of the board that is responsible for orienting? Is it a combination?
At this point, it's been Mary and me. I'm not saying a committee couldn't do it better. And then, of course, every meeting is about, we do something about the school, and then we do a mission moment about the school and the Sisters of Mercy. And that's for all of us as well. That ongoing formation, though, is, I think, if Mary and I were honest, we would say it's something that we never feel like we've ever arrived at. It is really important, but we know that is an ongoing area of growth for us, I think. Any ideas, anything you've tried that has worked? Do you have a committee? Has anybody worked with a committee to onboard people? That sounds really interesting to me.
Becky Montag and I have like a checklist of things that we want to make sure that the new members receive from an informational standpoint. Not a committee. It just seems to be more efficient if it's just the two of us. And the committee has already brought to us the new members, and then once they're on board for the orientation, Becky and I have taken that on. So I did have a question, unless there's somebody else that has a comment on that.
I was just going to say, we do a formal invitation or orientation in the summer, usually July, but we've actually been having some discussions within the mission and governance component as to whether some of the things that are presented at that stage, it might be already a little too late in the game, because, and some of it, particularly what you were discussing with respect to the Sisters of Mercy and the critical concerns and whatever, that might be something that we should be spending more time on in the beginning when we're saying to somebody, are you interested in being part of this, so that they're not, I get surprised or perhaps uninformed, because you end up with people who, depending on the reason that they may have been stood out as a potential board member, there can be potential conflicts with, let's just say, with some of those matters. And we're just thinking that that's something that we haven't really formulated any plan yet as to how to do it, but it's something that over the last few years, and probably for the reasons that you said, with respect of this things that have been going on around us historically and politically and whatever, it's something that we feel we have to start tackling earlier on in the process, rather than congratulations, you're a member of the board, and here's kind of what everything's about with respect to these matters, where people come from different backgrounds and may have very different feelings and positions with respect to those categories. So
And I think this time, Melba, that we're living in has made that even more critical. So,
I think you make such a good point. We, as Mercy Education, we do our board orientation for all new board members, but that's after you have invited them and talked to them at length, and then the board has voted. So we're talking now November, and they probably might have started with you in July. So there is a big gap of time to really learn about, from our world, our work about the critical concerns and the Mercy core values. So the timing is challenging to try to figure out the best time. But I think, Melva, you bring up such a good point of, do people really, and Carole, you said it, do people really understand Mercy before they make that commitment of becoming a board member and the important work that they have to do, or they're being called to do? That's sacred work. That is probably the most beautiful word you had said today, of the sacred work they're doing to help these schools to continue to be financially and religiously stable. So thank you for, there's so many things to think about, and I thank you for sharing those ideas with us.
Jeff, did you have another question?
I did. I a question and a comment. The question is, when you bring in an expert, say on student mental health or educational advances, how much time during a meeting, from a practical standpoint, do you use for that? Because usually our agenda is just packed full of stuff, whereas that kind of very important information, it might not be seen as something that's actually, well, how relevant is this to us? It's extremely relevant in the big picture, but from this meeting standpoint, how much time do you devote to that?
Our meetings are 2.5 hours, and when we do something like that, we try not to rush it. It's going to be a good 25 minutes because we want people to be able to engage. One of the things we've tried to do is cut down on the length of committee reports. And by one of the ways we've done that is to remind people, now, I'm assuming, and I used to say it in class, now I'm assuming everybody's read the homework.
Yeah, we can only pray that that's the case.
So I said, as a reminder, I've asked our committee chairs to hit big, only highlights and any voting items, because maybe an update on a strategic goal, but they're not going to read you that whole committee report. We don't have time, and that's not a good use of your time. So that has, if we've narrowed down some of that, it's freed up more time for these kinds of things.
Okay.
Without
And do you
doing
do
that,
that?
we would not have had time.
Yeah. Okay. Do you do that like every meeting, or just like every once in a while?
We try to do that at least twice a year.
Okay. Okay. All right. Then the one comment I had, I'm a Mercy husband and a Mercy dad. And I'm just humbled to be involved. I got to say, though, that one of the most appealing aspects of Catherine McCauley, from what I've learned from you all and just other sources, she's one that would do it and apologize. I think, and that's been very appealing to me. And the couple meetings that I've been where the sisters have been involved, granted, it's important to follow the rules, and I understand that, but I really like the notion of, in some situations, you've just got to, let's go ahead and we'll apologize. And so I just wanted to, I was interested in your comment.
I've always been a rule follower. We're gonna.
Okay.
For me, it's a little bit relational and that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
so
Right.
but
It's always respectful. The apologies are
You go.
always respectful. Thank you very much.
We haven't talked about what do you do if you have a bad board member, and that can happen. And for me, that is, if they're not coming, we don't need them. And that has to be addressed. And that's awkward, but it has to be addressed. And it can be addressed with, I've noticed you've missed the last couple of meetings, just making sure that this is a good match for you and your time, not your abilities, and your time commitments right now. Because we need all the voices at the table. We know something can come up occasionally, and both times we've done that, they have said, you're right, I probably need to move. And I think we've ended on good terms. But each time we replace them, we replace with somebody who was at the meetings. And that's what we need. So. And occasionally you have to remind people to be respectful in the meetings. And remind people we're not on adversarial sides here. When I was a provost, I used to dread going to the meetings at Bellarmine because I always felt like the board was trying to kind of whip us a little bit, and I don't think they meant to, but it was like, oh my God, we're working so hard, and you dragged yourself out of there feeling like, good Lord, what else do they? So I never want Mary and her team to feel like we're adversaries. On the other hand, we should ask important questions. And we should ask, is this all we can be doing here? You don't have to do that publicly. You don't want to embarrass anybody. And that's oftentimes in mine and Mary's individual meetings. Mary and I talk a lot of it. And I send her New York Times articles all the time on education. And say, I know you're busy in case you missed. But it could be on charter schools, could be on tax credits. Things are happening here in Kentucky. And she sends me things too. She and I should both be reading these things in our respective. And then we'll be putting those in our portal for board members to read too, some of those articles as we get that, so they can read up as they have time and or interest. I think we're finding the more we give the board to be engaged, the more engaged they are. And I'm going to be crass and say it, but it's important. I think that's when you get more money from board members too. They give to what they, don't we all? Yeah. Give to what we know, what we believe in, and what we think is a great institution. You've got to give me a reason to open my pocketbook because everybody's asking for my pocketbook. And once they know that, they're more likely to bring other donors in. Assumption's doing this great thing with their ACE program. Assumption's doing their great thing. They won volleyball again. They want to do this stuff for the volleyball. Might you be interested? And they already know they have a daughter who plays volleyball. Oh, I didn't know that. Maybe I will, because she's thinking about going to Assumption. That's when the spark happens. But I don't have much spark for something I don't know.
Right.
So you're bored. You want them to be in it with you. And that takes work. Anything else, Susan or Nell or anybody else? Anything I missed that you wanted to make sure?
What a beautiful way to end this presentation. Have the board be in it with you. I had all of these ending things in mind, and that is a perfect ending for us, Carole. The 9 years you've spent with Assumption as a graduate and the love and devotion you have for board leadership is just showing through in all that you shared with us. And you gave us so many things to think about and to share as heads of school and as board members. I thank you. I thank you for sharing your expertise with us, and thank you for joining us this morning. And Carole, it's been wonderful. So thank you very much. Do you want to share your prayer at the end?
I will, and I apologize for talking too much. And if any of you have time to send me an email on where I could tomorrow night maybe insert a time for them to talk or something to ask them to talk about, I would welcome that. And I'm sorry you wouldn't have gotten that benefit, but then they can maybe have a better presentation than you did. So I would welcome that. And Susan, from you too as well. Yes, so yeah, let's do. And they'll get this, they will get this presentation right.
Yes.
So I ended, and I don't know if you're going to show it or you want me to just read it.
Just read it would be beautiful.
This is Catherine's prayer for guidance. You who dwell within us, praying unceasingly, fill us with love and devotion. Holy wisdom, guide us in the choices we must make. Give us discerning hearts that we may choose what is good in accord with your desire. Lord God of mercy, finish in us the work you have begun.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, everyone. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Carole or Nell or myself, but thank you for joining us today.